The lunch crowd at Romano's bistro was loud enough to drown out almost anything. Forks clinked against plates. Glasses chimed together. Waiters hurried between tables with practiced smiles. The smell of fresh bread and roasted garlic drifted through the room, making every empty stomach impatient. Maya carried a heavy serving tray through the crowded aisle, careful not to brush against anyone. She had learned long ago that people rarely noticed a waitress unless she made a mistake, or unless she looked different. "Table 12, the manager called sharply. "I'm on my way," Maya answered with a gentle smile. Her smile was genuine, even if it rarely lasted. She reached the table just as one of the women looked up from her phone. The woman glanced at Maya from head to toe before exchanging a smirk with her friends. "Oh," she said loudly enough for nearby diners to hear. "I thought our food would arrive first." "I didn't know it had to survive quality control." The table erupted in laughter. Maya froze for the smallest fraction of a second. Then she set the plates down exactly as she had practiced thousands of times. "I'm sorry for the wait. I hope you enjoy your meal." She turned to leave. "Wait." The same woman leaned back in her chair, her smile widening. "You must get incredible employee discounts." More laughter. Another man at the table looked at Maya's name tag before saying, "No, she's probably the reason they keep running out of desserts." The laughter grew louder. People at neighboring tables looked over. Some smiled awkwardly. Some pretended not to notice. No one said a word. Maya felt every pair of eyes settle on her. Her cheeks burned, but years of practice kept her hands steady. "I'll bring your drinks in just a moment," she whispered. She walked away before anyone could see her blinking back tears. Inside the kitchen, another waitress sighed. "They're doing it again?" Maya nodded once. "It's fine." "It isn't. It will be." She picked up another tray before anyone could offer sympathy. Sympathy had never paid her rent. Kindness had never lasted. The safest thing she had ever learned was to keep moving. Back in the dining room, the same table was still laughing. One of the men watched her approach with the drinks and deliberately pulled his chair into her path. Maya stumbled. A glass tipped over. Ice scattered across the polished floor. The restaurant fell silent for one painful heartbeat. Then someone laughed. Another joined in. Soon the sound spread across the room like falling dominoes. "There it is," a customer shouted. "I knew she'd drop something. I'd lose my balance too if I carried that much extra weight," another voice added. Even a few employees lowered their eyes instead of stepping forward. Maya knelt to collect the broken pieces of glass before anyone else could get hurt. Not because it was her fault, because cleaning up other people's messes had become part of her life. As she reached for the final shard, a polished black shoe stopped inches away from her hand. The restaurant became strangely quiet. Maya slowly looked up. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit stood beside her table, his expression unreadable. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't spoken. Unlike everyone else in the room, he had watched every cruel word in complete silence. His dark eyes moved from the shattered glass to Maya, then calmly across the entire restaurant. No anger crossed his face, no pity either. Only a stillness that felt heavier than shouting. Without saying a single word, he reached into his jacket and removed a slim black card. He placed it gently on the table. The manager hurried over, confused. The stranger leaned forward and spoke so quietly that only the manager could hear him. Whatever he said drained every trace of color from the manager's face. And for the first time that afternoon, the people who had spent minutes humiliating Maya suddenly looked far more afraid than she did. The manager stared at the black card, as though it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. "Sir, perhaps we can discuss this in my office." The stranger gave a slight nod. "No," he replied calmly. "I'd rather remain here." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The confidence behind it carried farther than shouting ever could. Maya quickly lowered her head, embarrassed that everyone's attention was now fixed on the scene she wished would simply disappear. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll clean this up." The manager spun toward her with forced irritation. "Just finish cleaning and get back to work." She nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." The stranger watched without saying another word. While everyone else returned to their meals, he quietly resumed his seat near the window. He hadn't ordered dessert. He hadn't even touched the expensive coffee cooling beside him. Instead, his attention remained on the young waitress moving through the restaurant as if nothing had happened. She apologized to customers who had insulted her. She smiled at people who refused to smile back. She thanked diners who ignored her completely. Not once did bitterness appear on her face. It puzzled him. Across the room, an elderly couple struggled to divide their meal into two portions. Maya noticed before anyone else. She disappeared into the kitchen for barely a minute before returning with another bowl of soup. "I think the chef accidentally made an extra serving," she lied with a warm smile. "It would be a shame to waste it." The elderly woman blinked. "But we didn't order. It's already paid for." "It is?" Maya nodded. "So please don't let it get cold." The couple thanked her repeatedly, while she quietly walked away. The stranger knew the restaurant well enough to recognize there had been no extra soup. She had paid for it herself. A few minutes later, a little boy sitting with his exhausted mother accidentally knocked his spoon onto the floor. Before his mother could apologize, Maya crouched beside him. "No problem." She returned with a clean spoon and whispered, "Sometimes grown-ups drop things too." The little boy giggled. His mother smiled for the first time since arriving. Maya smiled back, as though making strangers feel better was the easiest thing in the world. The stranger noticed something else. Every act of kindness she gave seemed to cost her something: time, energy, money, yet she never hesitated. Near the kitchen entrance, two waitresses watched her from a distance. "I don't understand her," one muttered. "If people treated me like that every day, I'd quit." The other shrugged. "She can't afford to." Still, she's been here almost 4 years. 4 years. Long enough for everyone to think she's stopped feeling it. The first waitress looked toward Maya. "You think she has?" The second waitress shook her head. "No. I think she's just learned how to cry where nobody can see." Those words stayed with the stranger longer than they should have. An hour later, Maya stepped outside through the back door during her 5-minute break. She sat alone on an overturned crate behind the restaurant. No phone, no lunch. Just a bottle of water she slowly sipped while staring at the cracked pavement. After making certain no one was nearby, she finally allowed herself to breathe. The smile disappeared. Her shoulders sagged. She rubbed at her eyes before the tears could escape. "You have a job," she whispered to herself. "You have rent next week. You'll be okay." She repeated those words like a prayer she no longer believed. "They're right anyway." Her voice trembled. "If I were prettier, if I were thinner, they'd probably stop looking at me like that." She laughed softly. It wasn't happiness, it was surrender. For years, she had carried the same invisible weight that hurt far more than the one people mocked. She had slowly accepted their judgment as truth. The stranger stood several yards away, hidden behind the corner of the building. He hadn't followed her to comfort her. He hadn't interrupted her private moment. He simply listened. Every sentence quietly dismantled something inside him. People usually hid their true selves around powerful men. This woman had no idea anyone was listening. There was no performance, only exhaustion. When Maya wiped away her tears, she stood, straightened her uniform, practiced another cheerful smile in the reflection of the back door, and walked inside as though none of it had happened. The stranger remained where he was. For the first time in years, a business meeting, a shipment, and every problem waiting on his phone felt strangely unimportant. He looked once more at Romano's bistro, then at the woman who believed she deserved every cruel word thrown at her. His expression never changed. But somewhere behind those unreadable eyes, a decision had already begun to take shape. The next morning, Romano's bistro opened exactly as it had every day for the past 12 years. The lights came on, the ovens warmed, the coffee machines hissed. The staff arrived, believing it would be another ordinary shift. Only one person knew otherwise. The manager barely slept. He checked his phone every few minutes, reread the emails that had arrived shortly after midnight, and convinced himself they had to be fake. No one could purchase an entire restaurant overnight. Not without months of negotiations. Not without lawyers. Not without warning. Yet every document had been verified. Every signature matched. Every transfer had cleared. Ownership had changed before sunrise. He looked toward the front entrance, just as Maya walked inside, wearing the same neatly pressed uniform she had washed by hand the night before. "Good morning," she said with her usual smile. A few employees answered quietly. Most avoided her eyes. She assumed they still felt awkward after yesterday. She had no idea the entire room was waiting for someone else. At precisely 9 o'clock, the front door opened. The stranger entered wearing another perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Nothing about him demanded attention, yet somehow every conversation stopped. He walked calmly toward the manager. Without a word, he placed a leather folder on the counter. The manager opened it with trembling hands. Inside sat the final ownership documents. Across the bottom of the last page was a signature worth more than the building itself. The manager swallowed hard. It's really done?" "It was done 12 hours ago," the stranger replied. "I simply thought you'd prefer to hear it in person." One of the cooks slowly lowered the pan he had been holding. A waitress dropped a stack of menus. The dining room became unnaturally still. The manager forced a nervous smile. "Congratulations, sir." The stranger looked around the restaurant. "I believe congratulations are premature." He stepped into the center of the dining room. His voice remained calm. "I'd like everyone's attention." Every employee gathered instinctively. Even the early customers stopped eating. Maya lingered near the coffee station, confused. She wondered if some famous investor had bought the place. The stranger's eyes briefly met hers before returning to the room. "As of yesterday evening," he said, "Romano's Bistro came under new ownership." A murmur swept through the staff. "I have no intention of changing what makes this restaurant successful." Several shoulders relaxed. "But there are things that will change immediately." The room fell silent again. He turned toward the manager. "Respect is no longer optional." The manager's face tightened. I don't understand." "I believe you do." His words carried no anger, only certainty. "I reviewed yesterday's security footage." Several employees exchanged uneasy glances. "I watched customers humiliate one of your employees." No one spoke. "I watched members of this staff remain silent." The silence grew heavier, and I watched management allow it to continue. The manager tried to explain. "Sir, customers can be difficult. We try not to escalate situations. You confused professionalism with permission." The sentence landed harder than a shout. The stranger looked around the room once more. No employee in this restaurant will ever be expected to endure abuse simply because someone is paying for a meal. His gaze settled on the servers. "If a customer humiliates you, management will remove the customer." He looked at the cooks. "If I discover harassment between employees, the person responsible will leave before sunset." Finally, he looked directly at Maya. She immediately lowered her eyes. She was certain this attention couldn't possibly be about her. "You." She looked up cautiously. "What is your name?" "Maya, sir." "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 4 years." "And in those 4 years," he asked quietly, "has anyone ever apologized for what happened yesterday?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The answer was written across her face, long before she whispered, "No." A painful silence settled over the room. The stranger reached into his pocket and removed the folded receipt from the bowl of soup Maya had quietly paid for the previous afternoon. He placed it gently on the counter. "You thought no one noticed." Maya stared at it, completely bewildered. "You bought food for people who had less than you." He then placed a second item beside it. The receipt for the replacement spoon. "And you replaced a child's spoon with your own money, because you didn't want his mother to feel embarrassed." The room slowly turned toward Maya. Not with laughter this time, with surprise. The stranger's voice softened. "Yesterday, I spent several hours watching this restaurant." He paused. "I learned something." Everyone waited. The finest person in this building, his eyes met Maya's, was the one everyone treated as though she mattered the least. No one laughed. No one dared. For the first time in 4 years, the room was looking at Maya for an entirely different reason. Maya wished the floor would open beneath her. She had spent years trying not to be noticed. Now every eye in the restaurant rested on her. She instinctively took a small step backward. I was only doing my job." The stranger regarded her quietly. "No." The single word surprised everyone. "You were doing far more than your job." He turned to the rest of the staff. "Kindness cannot be listed on a menu." His gaze swept across the dining room. "But it is the reason people return." No one argued. The silence itself felt like agreement. The manager cleared his throat. "Sir, about yesterday." The stranger looked at him. "You'll apologize." "I already—" "No." His voice remained calm. "You explained. Those are not the same thing." The manager's shoulders dropped. He slowly walked toward Maya. Every step seemed heavier than the last. When he finally stood before her, he struggled to meet her eyes. "Maya," his voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I should have stopped them. I should have stood beside you. I failed you." The words sounded unfamiliar coming from a man who had spent years speaking only in orders. Maya stared at him. She had imagined hearing an apology countless times. In every version, she thought it would erase the hurt. Instead, it simply left her speechless. "It's okay," she whispered automatically. The stranger interrupted before the manager could answer. "No." Both of them looked at him. "It is not okay." He let the words settle. "When decent people are taught to accept mistreatment," he said quietly, "the cruelty never ends." Maya lowered her eyes again. She had never heard anyone defend her without expecting something in return. The stranger reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. This time he removed a small envelope. He offered it to her. She hesitated. "I can't accept tips from customers. I'm not a customer." The room was silent enough to hear someone set down a coffee cup. With trembling fingers, Maya accepted the envelope. Inside was a new employee identification card. Her brow furrowed. The familiar restaurant logo remained. Everything else had changed. Guest relations supervisor. He looked up in confusion. "There must be a mistake." "There isn't. I've never supervised anyone. You've already been leading." She shook her head. "I don't understand. You've spent 4 years taking care of everyone in this building." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "It's time someone trusted you to do it officially." The manager blinked. "But that position doesn't even exist." "It does now." One of the cooks smiled before quickly hiding it. A dishwasher quietly clapped once. Another employee joined him. Within seconds, the applause spread across the restaurant. Not loud, not forced, genuine. Maya's eyes widened. No one had ever applauded her before. She felt tears threatening to return. Only these were different. For once, they didn't come from humiliation. They came from being seen. The applause faded as the stranger addressed the room again. "This promotion comes with a raise." Maya's mouth fell open. A significant one. She immediately shook her head. "Sir, I haven't earned that." He almost smiled. "Yesterday you paid for strangers to eat from your own wages. You earned it long before today." Her fingers tightened around the identification card. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to ask why. Instead, she could only whisper, "Why are you doing this for me?" The question lingered between them. Every employee wondered the same thing. The stranger looked out through the restaurant windows for a long moment before answering. "When I was 12, he said quietly, "my mother worked in a place very much like this. No one moved. She wasn't mocked for her weight." He paused. "But she was humiliated every day for being poor." His eyes remained fixed somewhere far beyond the glass. People with power watched. They did nothing. When she came home, his voice lowered. She always smiled. "I believed she was happy." Another pause. "I was too young to recognize the difference between a smile and one worn to survive." The restaurant had become completely still. "I promised myself that if I ever had the power to stop someone from carrying that kind of loneliness," he looked directly at Maya, "I wouldn't stay silent." For the first time since she had met him, the mystery surrounding him seemed to shift. He was still a stranger, still impossibly wealthy, still intimidating. But beneath all of that, Maya caught a glimpse of a little boy who had once watched someone he loved suffer in silence. And somehow, that made him seem more human than frightening. She looked down at the new identification card once more, then back at him. She wasn't sure her life had changed. Not yet. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if it could. The dining room slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed in cautious whispers. Plates were served. Orders were called. Yet something invisible had changed. The air itself felt different. People who had once walked past Maya without a second glance now greeted her by name. One of the cooks held the kitchen door open as she passed. "After you, supervisor." His grin was playful, but respectful. Maya almost looked behind herself to see who he was talking to. She still wasn't used to hearing the title. She wasn't sure she ever would be. The manager spent the morning personally checking on every table. Not because anyone had ordered him to, because the stranger's words refused to leave his mind. Respect is no longer optional. By lunchtime, the restaurant was busier than usual. Word had already spread through the neighborhood that Romano's Bistro had new ownership. A local blogger had posted photographs of expensive cars parked outside that morning. Customers arrived out of curiosity. They stayed because the atmosphere felt unexpectedly warm. Maya noticed something else. Nobody laughed when she walked past. Nobody whispered. Nobody stared. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt unfamiliar. Years of humiliation had trained her to expect another cruel joke just around the corner. Every smile made her wonder whether it was genuine. Every compliment sounded borrowed. Near the hostess stand, an elderly woman reached for her hand. "My dear." Maya stopped. "I came here yesterday." Maya searched her memory before recognizing her. The woman from the extra bowl of soup. "You were very kind to my husband." Maya smiled. "I'm glad you enjoyed your lunch." The elderly woman gently squeezed her hand. "No. We enjoyed being treated with dignity." Her husband nodded beside her. "You reminded us that kindness still exists." They quietly left. Maya stood motionless for several seconds. No customer had ever thanked her like that. Across the dining room, The stranger watched the exchange from his usual table near the window. He still hadn't introduced himself. He seemed perfectly comfortable remaining a mystery. A man in an expensive suit approached him carrying a briefcase. "Sir, you've postponed 3 meetings." "I know. The board is asking questions." "They can continue asking." The assistant hesitated. "The investors won't understand." "They don't need to." He signed several documents without looking away from the restaurant floor. "What they need," he said calmly, "is patience." The assistant followed his employer's gaze until he noticed Maya laughing softly with a little girl who had been frightened after dropping her ice cream. Without hesitation, Maya knelt beside her. "It's all right. It happens." She disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later, she returned carrying another scoop. "No charge." The little girl's face lit up. Her mother reached for her purse. "I insist on paying." Maya shook her head. "Then promise me she'll enjoy every bite." The child grinned so widely that chocolate covered the tip of her nose. Even the stranger couldn't suppress the faintest hint of a smile. His assistant noticed. In 12 years of working beside him, he had seen that expression only twice. "You've taken an unusual interest in this restaurant," the assistant observed carefully. The stranger folded his hands. "No, I've taken an interest in one extraordinary person." The assistant glanced toward Maya again. "Should I prepare the usual background report?" "No." That answer came immediately. "I don't want a file. I want the truth." "The truth, sir. You can learn facts about someone's life from paper." His eyes rested on Maya. "But character," he said quietly, "can only be witnessed." Meanwhile, Maya was reorganizing the reservation book when one of the newer waitresses approached her nervously. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Yesterday," the young woman looked ashamed. "I should have stood up for you." "I didn't. I was scared I'd lose my job." Maya was silent. "I've felt terrible ever since." For a moment, the old Maya almost answered automatically. "It's okay." She stopped herself. The stranger's words echoed inside her. "It is not okay." She looked at the young waitress with gentle eyes. "It hurt." The waitress lowered her head. "I know. But," Maya continued, "I'm grateful you're saying something now." The younger woman blinked. "You aren't angry?" "I don't want anyone else spending years carrying guilt." She offered a small smile. "Let's just do better from today." The waitress unexpectedly hugged her. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make several nearby employees smile. Across the room, the stranger quietly stood. He adjusted the cuffs of his jacket. His assistant looked surprised. "We're leaving?" "For now." He placed a small business card beneath the untouched coffee cup. No name, no company, only a phone number embossed in silver. As he walked toward the exit, Maya hurried after him. "Sir," he stopped. "I still don't even know your name." For the first time since they had met, he smiled openly. "My name is Adrian." She repeated it softly. "Adrian." It somehow suited him. He nodded once. "When you finally believe what I already know about you," he said, "call me." Before Maya could ask what he meant, he stepped outside. A sleek black car pulled away from the curb moments later. She remained standing in the doorway, the silver-edged card resting in her palm. She had spent years believing that the world only noticed her long enough to hurt her. Now one man had walked into her life, and somehow left her with something even more frightening than humiliation: hope. For the rest of the afternoon, Maya caught herself glancing toward the front door. Each time it opened, a tiny part of her expected Adrian to walk back inside. Each time it wasn't him. She slipped the silver-edged card into the pocket of her apron, telling herself it didn't matter. He had done more than enough. People like him lived in a different world. People like her simply crossed their path for a moment, before disappearing again. By closing time, the restaurant looked different. Not because of new decorations, not because of expensive renovations, because the people inside it behaved differently. The manager thanked every employee before they left. The cooks joked together while cleaning the kitchen. One of the waiters volunteered to mop the dining room without being asked. It was as though Adrian had changed far more than the ownership papers. He had changed what everyone believed was acceptable. Maya untied her apron and reached for her bag. "You heading home?" She turned to find the younger waitress smiling at her. "I am. We're all grabbing coffee across the street." "You should come." Maya almost refused. For years, no one had invited her anywhere after work. Her first instinct was to assume they were only asking because they felt sorry for her. Seeing the hesitation on Maya's face, the waitress gently squeezed her arm. "We're asking because we want you there." The words settled somewhere deep inside her. She smiled. "I'd like that." An hour later, laughter echoed around a tiny cafe table. Real laughter. not the kind meant to wound. For the first time in years, Maya wasn't sitting alone. She listened more than she spoke, but every few minutes, someone asked her opinion. Someone included her. Someone remembered to refill her cup. They weren't extraordinary gestures. To Maya, they felt extraordinary. When she finally walked home beneath the evening lights, the city seemed strangely different. Or perhaps she was. She reached her small apartment and unlocked the door. The familiar silence greeted her. Usually it felt comforting. Tonight it felt lonely. She placed her bag on the sofa. As the silver-edged card slipped onto the cushion, she stared at it for a long moment. "When you finally believe what I already know about you, call me." She whispered the words aloud. "What do you know about me?" No answer came. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator. She smiled faintly. Then, for the first time in years, she stood before the small mirror hanging beside her bedroom door. Normally she looked away after only a second. Tonight she forced herself to remain still. She saw the same round face, the same tired eyes, the same woman who had been mocked only 2 days earlier. Nothing about her appearance had changed, yet something else had. She no longer saw someone deserving of ridicule. Not completely, not yet. But the certainty had begun to crack. A single tear slid down her cheek. This time she didn't wipe it away. The following morning began with another surprise. A delivery truck stopped outside Romano's bistro before sunrise. Several workers carefully carried large boxes into the dining room. The manager opened the first one. Inside were brand new employee uniforms. Another contained ergonomic shoes for every member of the staff. A third held upgraded kitchen equipment. Taped neatly to the final box was a handwritten note. "People who spend their lives taking care of others deserve to be taken care of too. Adrian." The manager quietly folded the note. He looked around the room. "I've worked in restaurants for 23 years. I've never seen an owner spend money on the staff before spending it on the building. Neither had anyone else." When Maya arrived, she found everyone gathered around the new uniforms. "They're beautiful," one of the cooks whispered. The younger waitress smiled at Maya. "I think he's trying to spoil us." Maya looked toward the empty table by the window. It remained unoccupied. For reasons she couldn't explain, she missed seeing him there. Just before lunch, the restaurant doors opened again. Not for Adrian. For the same group of customers who had humiliated Maya 2 days earlier. The woman who had started the insults looked around confidently, before recognizing Maya. A smug smile returned to her face. "Well," she began, "I see you're still." She never finished the sentence. The manager stepped directly between them. "I'm afraid we won't be serving you today." The woman's smile disappeared. "Excuse me? Our restaurant has adopted a zero-tolerance policy toward abusive behavior. You publicly humiliated a member of my staff. You are no longer welcome here." Her face turned red. "You can't refuse paying customers." "I can." The manager calmly held the door open. "And I just did." The group stood frozen. Other diners watched in complete silence. At last, the woman muttered something under her breath and stormed outside with her friends trailing behind. The door closed behind them. No one applauded, no one needed to. Maya looked at the manager. He smiled awkwardly. "I should have done that the first day." She smiled back. "So should I." The answer surprised even her. She hadn't meant she should have thrown them out. She meant she should have believed she deserved better. And for the first time in a very long time, she truly did. Maya carried those words with her for the rest of the week. Not because they were dramatic, because they were true. She had spent years believing that dignity was something other people decided whether she deserved. Now, every morning she tied on her apron with a little more confidence than the day before. She still wasn't fearless. She still caught herself wondering whether strangers were laughing when they whispered. Old wounds did not disappear overnight, but they no longer controlled every step she took. The change was small, then it became noticeable. Customers began asking for her by name. Families requested her section. Online reviews mentioned the warmth of the restaurant. Again and again, one sentence appeared. "The woman who welcomed us made us feel like family." The manager smiled every time he read another review. One afternoon, he pinned several of them to the employee notice board. "This," he said, looking at the staff, "is what success looks like. Not higher profits, not fuller tables. People leaving happier than they arrived." Maya stared at the reviews. None of them mentioned her appearance. Not one. They remembered her kindness. For years she had feared people only saw her body. Now complete strangers were seeing her heart. Nearly a month passed before she looked at Adrian's card again. It had remained inside the drawer beside her bed. Not because she had forgotten it, because she wasn't ready. She picked it up that evening and turned it over in her fingers. Her reflection stared back from the dark window. This time, she smiled first. Then she picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over the number. What if he doesn't remember me? She laughed at herself. Of course he remembered. He had bought an entire restaurant. Taking a slow breath, she pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. I was beginning to think you'd never call. She couldn't help smiling. You knew I would. I hoped. There was a brief silence. What changed? Adrian asked gently. Maya looked at her reflection. A month ago, I would have called because I needed someone to rescue me. She paused. I'm calling today because I don't. Another silence. Only this one felt warm. I thought you'd understand. Adrian smiled to himself. You finally do. The following evening, they met in a quiet garden overlooking the city. There were no bodyguards standing nearby, no expensive meeting room, no business documents. Just two people walking slowly beneath rows of flowering trees. Maya looked at him. I've been asking myself one question every day. I know. You do? You've been wondering why I bought the restaurant. She nodded. I never understood. Adrian stopped walking. I didn't buy it for you. Her eyebrows lifted. I bought it because a place that could treat someone like you that way didn't deserve to stay the same. He looked toward the setting sun. Buildings can be purchased. Furniture can be replaced. But cultures, they have to be changed. He turned back to her. You changed that restaurant. I only made sure no one stopped you. Tears gathered in Maya's eyes. Not from sadness. From finally understanding. You never saw me as someone who needed saving. No. I saw someone who had forgotten her own value. He smiled. I simply refused to let everyone else decide it for you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maya laughed softly. What? I spent years wishing someone would tell those people they were wrong. And, I finally realized, they were never the people I needed to convince. She placed a hand over her heart. It was me. Adrian's smile carried the quiet pride of a teacher, watching a student surpass every expectation. Exactly. Several weeks later, Romano's Bistro celebrated its busiest day in history. Every table was full. Every employee moved with confidence. The atmosphere buzzed with warmth instead of tension. Near the entrance hung a new framed statement that every customer read before being seated. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity here. No exceptions. Maya paused beneath it for a moment. She remembered the frightened woman who had once cleaned broken glass while strangers laughed. She barely recognized her. The restaurant doors opened. A little girl rushed inside ahead of her parents. She tripped. Before embarrassment could reach her face, Maya knelt with a smile. It happens. The child giggled. Maya helped her to her feet. Across the dining room, Adrian sat quietly at the familiar table by the window. He wasn't inspecting the business. He wasn't checking profits. He was simply watching a woman who no longer needed anyone to stand between her and the world. Their eyes met. Maya walked toward him with calm, unhurried confidence. Not as the broken waitress he had first met. Not as someone rescued by a powerful man, but as a woman who finally knew her worth. She smiled. He smiled back. Neither of them needed to say a word. Some victories were too deep for speeches. The greatest thing Adrian had ever bought was never the restaurant. It was the chance for one remarkable woman to see herself the way she had deserved to all along.